Hey, this is Sean Pickett. I'm the founder and CEO of Sales Integrity, a B2B tech sales coach, and your host for the Sales Integrity Podcast. I'm ready to make it another great podcast today. And with that, let's get today's episode rocking and rolling. All right, welcome back to the Sales Integrity Podcast. I am really excited about today's guest, Scott Ingram. Scott, are you ready to share some wisdom with Sales Integrity Nation today?
I am, Sean. Let's do it.
Awesome. Let's jump right into it. Scott, as you know, I have a belief system in place here, and one of my beliefs when it comes to interviewing is that nobody can introduce themselves better than themselves, right? You know you better than I would. So what I'm going to do is have you start off the show by introducing yourself, talk a little bit about background, where what you've how you've come up through the ranks, maybe in sales, what you're doing today, and just to give an audience a sense of who you are as my guest today. So that way, when we get into the meat of the questions, they kind of understand your point of view and your frame of reference. So if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to do it. So first, I am a husband and father of two girls. I have 9 and 11-year-old girls. And I like to think of myself as an intentional individual contributor. So I've been in sales for the last 10 years, predominantly in the marketing technology space. So have been through 2 IPOs in that experience, first with Bizarre Voice and then with Eloqua, which was subsequently acquired by Oracle for nearly $1 billion. And since I left Oracle, that wasn't quite the right fit for me. I've really worked in the extended partner ecosystem around what is now the Oracle Marketing Cloud. So that's kind of the sales background, and I still work in that type of a role. A little over a year ago, I launched the Sales Success Stories podcast because I wanted to understand. I mean, like you, Sean, I know you read a ton of books. I've read a lot of sales books, consumed a lot of this information, but I think that sales is evolving very quickly today. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to hear from what the best of the best are doing right now. That voice seemed to be missing from kind of the sales content ecosystem. So on my podcast, I only interview either number one, or if somebody works for Microsoft or LinkedIn or ADP, some of the companies I've interviewed so far, I'll settle for top 1% because I've got so many dang divisions. It's hard to figure out who's the full on number one. Yeah. But that's kind of the approach, and I have just learned a ton, been able to apply a lot, and it's been a blast. And I've met a lot of other great sales podcasters like yourself, so it's been a ton of fun.
That's awesome, Scott. And for the audience, we're going to dive more into detail on that podcast and kind of lessons learned from it. But our audience, Scott, as you know, are B2B tech sales professionals and leaders, right? So they have a complex technical B2B sale, typically some sort of software, hardware, data center, IT services, IT consulting, on down the line. So they're installing, configuring, providing some services wrapped around in support of a technical solution. So the companies you named, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Oracle, some of the others, this will be like down the middle of the fairway for a lot of our listeners. You probably already caught their attention, so they're going to lean in here and listen very closely because there's the pontificators and the prognosticators and all the people that have ideas, right? But then there's the actual practitioners, those that you called yourself an individual practitioner, someone who is actually in the field selling. So what's unique about Scott's podcast, Sales Success Stories, is it is exactly what it says it is. These are success stories from people like you, our audience that are listening right now, that are actually in the field selling in the trenches just like you are. Right? Or if you're a sales leader, these are sales practitioners that are like your sales team that are out there. So that's a great podcast. It's Sales Success Stories. You can find it wherever podcasts are found, right? iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud. Are you on SoundCloud? I don't know.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
I'm on SoundCloud too.
Awesome. So go check that out. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But before we do, I always start off the interview with my very first question. Same question I ask all of my audiences. Everyone knows I'm a big fan of integrity, in the sales process and overall the sales realm, if you will. I named my company Sales Integrity. This is the Sales Integrity Podcast. So my first question is always the same. Scott, how do you define sales integrity or having integrity while selling as a sales professional?
Yeah, well, I think it's really easy, right? I think it comes down to doing the right thing. And I try and take sort of a client-first approach to that. But I think a way that a lot of salespeople get sideways in that is if they have that thinking, they think, okay, well, now it's my job to get the client the best deal possible and discount as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I actually believe that, again, to have integrity, I have to do what's right for my client, but I also have to do what's right for my employer. And I think both parties win when you maintain margin. And because if I maintain margin, I'm going to be around tomorrow, number one. But number two, now I'm able to invest in R&D and innovation and things that are going to make my organization a better partner for that client over the long term. Mm-hmm. So I think you can have your cake and eat it too with that type of a view around integrity, and you can continue to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I take copious notes. I learn from all of my guests when I'm interviewing them, and I love that. That's a quote from you, a little quotable here. Both parties win when you maintain margin. Right.
Absolutely.
So I think that's awesome because there's all sorts of goodness that comes out of that. You want, as a customer, you want your vendors to be partners. You want your partners to make money. Right. And if you're negotiating them down to the point where they have little to no margin, they're just not going to give you their best effort like they would to preserve margin of another customer that's seeing their value and paying them for what the value is. Right. So it kind of goes both ways for those that are listening that buy, the sales leaders, we buy. I'm a CEO of a company and we buy, so I have salespeople calling us as well. So it's important to maintain the margin and pay for fair value. But as a sales professional, I bring that up because you want to get into the mind of the customer, of course, and really understand that, why do you want to maintain your margin? Why do you not just want to immediately drop down to a discount? It cheapens the value of what you're offering. They don't take it as serious, and your company that's delivering, the people that are delivering won't take it as serious if you're not making money. So everybody loses when you discount and you discount repeatedly. You want to maintain that margin. So I love that. Both parties win when you maintain margin. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump in to your podcast. I'm real eager to talk a little bit more about the sales success stories and all that stuff. So first, you mentioned this at the outset. Let's set the stage. You have a pretty strict policy, right? It's only top, I call them sales achievers, but the top 1% at companies. So where did you get that idea? Did you see a void in the marketplace when you look at other sales related podcasts? Nobody's interviewing these folks, and just kind of where'd you come up with the idea first? I'm always fascinated with that. So let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the void. I've, again, having consumed all of this sales content, it kind of drives me crazy that if you really look at most of it, it was written by folks who haven't sold anything but themselves in years and oftentimes decades. And so I felt like there's a real gap here in terms of what's going on in the market. And I'm not sure what it was that inspired me to really go after that number one kind of top dog spot. It's been the biggest curse, but also the biggest opportunity, right? Because by definition, it's very focused. I mean, I got a message this morning. Somebody's like, "Oh, I've listened to your show and I know you do this, but you should talk to our CEO." I'm like, "Nope, not an individual contributor, not the number one guy." Actually, he may be the number one guy, but that's really not what it's about, right? And so it's really helped me focus, and I think that that's valuable. Right? There's something to be learned from the person who is at the very top every single time, and that's been the experience. And I think the folks that I've interviewed, just because of my own background, really matches that of your audience, right? B2B, technical type of sales, long sales cycles. I sell to predominantly Fortune 500 companies. And so that's a lot of the folks that I've interviewed, but I also believe that there's a lot of value in diversity. And we can get into this echo chamber if all we ever listen to is B2B technical sales stuff. We start hearing the same stuff over and over again, and maybe it's not even true. Maybe we've just heard it so many times that we think it's true. And I think it's interesting to break out of that mold. So, I've talked to folks who were doing social selling for a sports team at the Austin Spurs, and talking with a gentleman who, amazing story, John Hinkson, sold 1,600 cars in 3 years. His first time in sales in his early 50s.
Wow.
Incredible story, right? And so I think there's so much to be learned from getting out of that box a little bit every now and then. And again, you pull something from everybody. And I know you talk about sales process quite a bit, Sean. I ask my guests about that a lot too. And very rarely is there one cohesive, like, I'm all in on one thing. It's really they have assimilated this series of, oh, I take the best of this piece from that program and this part of negotiation, and they've really assembled their own strategy and approach that works for them and fits their style.
Yeah, that's the best of the best approaches, I call it. I get asked that a lot when I'm going in and consulting with CEOs, presidents, founder, co-founder teams of tech companies. And, naturally we're working on sales process right away. And they want to know, is there this silver lining, this magic bullet, so to speak, right? Is there just kind of this, one size fits all type approach? And no, you can look at, solution selling, strategic selling, customer-centric selling, spin selling. You go on down the line. There's so many good methodologies, I'll call them, out there, and process methodologies that, what I found is that they tend to be overkill. There's so much stuff there, it overwhelms the sales mind, right? And as sales professionals, a lot of times, let's face it, we tend to have the attention span of a gnat, right? And so
I'm sorry, what?
Exactly right. Look, squirrel, right? So what you want to do is distill it down. And I've been forced to do this myself because sometimes I can get long-winded. So I try and narrow down the focus. My course videos that I have for online courses and coaching videos, I try and get them more bite-sized. And I've been getting a lot of feedback, from my audience, say, hey, that's helping out a lot more. So that's something that's really interesting. The best of the best. Hearing you say that doesn't surprise me. And working with top sales professionals, internationally, actually, that they have that same commonality. They're a student of the game of sales. They've learned as much as they can from all the different types of methodologies and gurus out there, but they have this incredible ability to distill it down, right, into a honed focus and take the best of what works for them, and they apply it for them. So that's great. And that transitions me to my next question for you about the podcast. We talk about the attention span of a gnat. This isn't for the faint of heart, is it? Right? Your podcast, because it's probably difficult that you don't probably have all the top reps in the world lined up to jump on your podcast. Maybe they don't know about it yet. Maybe they're just so busy. That's why they're the top rep. But you have a nice steady flow of interviews, I've noticed, because I'm a listener of your podcast. And these could go an hour and sometimes longer, maybe a couple hours in some cases, right? I think, but really they're kind of longer podcasts. And what I found is that being the best is not easy. If it was, everybody would be, right? So for those that are out there listening, when you go listen to the sales success stories, you're in for a ride. But with podcasts, the podcast world, it cracks me up. People are like, oh man, these get a little bit long. Well, listen to it over the course of different. You don't have to listen to one thing in one setting, right? You're in the car, you're on a walk, you're working out. I can listen to your podcast across 2 to 3 different, sit downs, if you will, for that. So talk to me a little bit about the structure of that. When you get, this audience, this top sales professional, you've got their time now. Do you have kind of a set agenda for that, or do you go in and do you ask them the same questions, or is it kind of ebb and flow based on that person's unique skill sets and what they're doing and what they're selling?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. The model that I used is, I'm a huge fan of the Tim Ferriss show, and so the way I think of what my role is really deconstructing world-class sales professionals. Mm-hmm. And so I do have an overarching structure that probably represents 70 to 80% of the conversation, but mm-hmm. I will go chase rabbits, right? If they say something interesting, I want to dig into that and understand that more, whatever it is that sort of comes out of them. I think that if content is good and if there's a relevant conversation, how long it is doesn't matter, right? We're going to talk as long as there's value in that conversation. And so really, I don't set a timer. In fact, I book the interviews for 2 hours. So, on average, we're probably in the 75-minute range, but you're right. I mean, some have been 45 or 50 minutes. Others have got really dang close to 2 hours, or I might have passed 2 hours on one of them. And that's just the way it is. Again, as long as there's value there, and because I'm in this same role, right? I am my audience. This is what I've always wanted. So at the end of the day, I'm sort of going there for myself, but I think that benefits the other sellers that are listening.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you'll chase rabbits. You'll go down a hole if you feel there's some unique perspective there that the audience can benefit from and gain value from. But I'm certain you've probably seen some common themes across all these top sales professionals. So if there's common themes that top sales professionals exhibit, let's talk a little bit about what those would be. Can you share, 2, 3 of those with our audience here?
Yeah, let me give you the 3 that I think are the most consistent. And first, let's set aside hard work. right? You don't get to be number one if you're not busting your butt to get it done, right? So forget about that. Of course, that's happening, right? But I think the first thing is there's a huge level of belief. And that belief is in really three things. It's in their solution, right? If you don't believe in what it is you're selling and the value that it's going to bring to your buyer, you're not going to be successful. And I'm at a point now, I feel so strongly about this, that if you don't think you can get there, right? If you can't go, because again, we get mired in the BS and we hear all the bad stuff, like go talk to your happy customers, like hear some good win stories and either get that belief or get somewhere else where you're going to have that success, right? The second is they believe in themselves, right? There's just a level of confidence edging on, actually, I like the word swagger. I think that's an important word, as long as you don't take it too far, right? So I'm confident in myself. And then the third thing is they're confident in their process, right? This is the way that I sell. This is how I consistently execute. They do it different ways, but they found a way that works for them, which leads me into the second thing, which is there really isn't one recipe. You know, the way that these individuals have become successful is all over the board in terms of the way they do it. But I think that the commonality in that is they have a very high degree of self-awareness. They know what their strengths are and what they're good at, and they leverage the crud out of it, right? And so that goes back to what we were talking about before, Sean, with this best of sort of assimilation of knowledge over years, is pulling out the best things and incorporating what's going to add value to your process and your strategy and the way that you approach things. So, you know, I think it can be challenging from a sales leadership perspective, like, oh my God, how do I manage everybody doing it a different way? I want everybody doing it the same way. And I think that's where, you know, one of the hot topics out there right now is kind of this training versus coaching. And I think it's coaching that brings out that individuality that gets people to extraordinary levels, right? They're not going to get there with your plain vanilla approach. First I do this, then I do that. And it doesn't work, right? We've got to be human.
Yeah. I always talk about, you know, training is the introduction of a concept, teaching someone something for the first time, to where coaching is that reinforcement mechanism. It's training reinforcement. And the real secret sauce here is it translates the ideas that you learn in the classroom, so to speak, into habit forming execution in the real world of selling. So it's kind of the difference of training and coaching. In my world, we do a lot of coaching, right? We do corporate sales coaching programs. We get down to that one-on-one level. No one in their right mind in front of all their peers in a group-based training class is going to raise their hand and go, yeah, let me share with you my deepest, darkest fears. You know, I'm terrible at, you know, I don't understand social selling. I'm terrified of meeting people out at now. They're not going to say that in front of their peers. And the alpha male or female is going to dominate the room, you know, to show how smart they are in a lot of those training workshops. So it's going to suppress those that really need that learning. But in a one-on-one coaching session, you know, to reinforce what was introduced at the group level as concepts, to say, okay, now let's tailor this to how you can apply it in the real world of selling for you. That's the absolute secret sauce. So yeah, there's a lot of debate on that. I actually speak on that at times, the difference between training and coaching, and even managing. That's a third element that's different than the first two, you know, training and coaching. So it's a fascinating topic. We could probably go on a whole nother, you know, sidebar on that. But you were going through the three common themes. You're going to share three. You talked about belief, and belief, to summarize what you said, Scott, is in three things. Their solution, themselves, and their process. Then you talked about there's no one recipe. Just be you, be authentic, be the best version of yourself, and have a little bit of swagger you talked about. So then what would the third thing be?
So the third thing is really about mentors. And one thing that really just struck me recently, and I'm at 30 some odd episodes in at this point, I'm surprised I just realized this, is I don't think any single top producer I've talked to so far is in that position despite their boss. Right? They all have great supportive leaders who are helping them become better, but they also leverage mentors all over the place. And so one of my favorite conversations, talking with Trong Nguyen, who was managing a $50 million book of business at Microsoft, doing truly game-changing deals in healthcare and financial services. And he talks about mentors across the board, but he would build mentors inside of his client organizations, right? Help me, help you type of stuff. And it's such a consistent thing, right? You have to surround yourself with people who are better than you, who are where you want to be. And that is really, really powerful stuff, right? We can get a lot of value from books. We can get a lot of value from all this information that's online. But at the end of the day, we've got to have people look at us and see our strengths, because a lot of times we can't see those things for ourselves. So finding those mentors and building that community around yourself is a massive, massive indicator of success.
Yeah. And where do these top sales professionals, these top sales achievers that you interview, where do they say they typically find their mentors? How do they go about, like, if there's what our audience is listening right now, they say, hey, that sounds great. Maybe I haven't really explored mentorship and finding a mentor. Where would I even begin there? Do you have any ideas that you could share with the audience on that?
Yeah, I mean, a great place to begin, and this is the place that Kyle Gutzler began, and Kyle has a great story. He literally doubled his sales in 1 year and became the #1 producer. Mm-hmm. And where he started that year before was he identified who are the top salespeople in my organization. And he was the one who brought them together. And they had, I think it was a monthly brunch or something that they did, right? So just spending time with the people who are, again, where you want to be and learning from them and learning what they're doing. And his approach was, okay, great. I'm going to learn what they're doing. And then I'm just going to apply a multiplier. Yeah. So, you're doing X, cool. I'm going to do X times 2. And I promise I'll get there.
Yeah, that's interesting you see that. So the first thing is start within your organization. If you're not the top sales achiever, the top sales rep there, go seek out the top 1 or 2 reps and ask for mentorship. Little related story there. When I was young, Sean, and first starting in the IT consulting world in a sales role back in the 90s in the Chicago market, first thing I did is I went and looked at the stack rankings of all the sales reps in the company that I worked for. And I picked off the top guy. I walked down to his office. I introduced myself to him. Sean Pickett, nice to meet you. And then I asked him a question right off the bat. I said, how would you like to be a part of the Breakfast of Champions? Would you like to join that elite group? And this guy's like, wow, that sounds awesome. What is that about? I said, it's the top, it's the best of the best reps. They meet for breakfast every Thursday morning. They collaborate and share ideas on what's working well for them, help each other overcome challenges and all that good stuff. How would you like to be a part of that? He goes, that sounds awesome. Who are the members of this group? I said, you and me. it was my creative.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it was my creative way to ask him for mentorship. And he's like, all right, kid, you got some guts here. He said a different word, but he's like, all right, I'll go do that with you. And actually, I got that mentorship right away. We didn't necessarily meet every Thursday. He was real busy as a top rep, but we met at least twice a month for breakfast. I had to pay, of course. I'm seeking out his mentorship, but it was well worth the investment of time and a little bit of money for breakfast, because I really shortened the time frame to learn what the best of the best do in a very short period of time. And that really helped catapult me into my career in the IT sales world. So I'm a huge believer in that mentorship. Building on that same theme of mentorship, Scott, before we were recording, we were talking a little bit, chatting a little bit before the podcast recorded, and you were talking to me about, or telling me a little bit about this event. We didn't get too much into detail, but you have an upcoming event. It's kind of built around this theme of mentorship, right? And it's going to be in Austin coming up. So can you talk a little bit about that? I think our audience would benefit from the value of what that's going to bring to the table. Can you share a little bit more about that?
So it's really a continuation of that gap, right? So if you do a Google search for the top events for sales professionals, you'll find a list of 25 events. And if you go through that list, really 0 of them are specifically focused on the individual contributor. They're built for the sales leader, the sales manager, sales operations, marketing, entrepreneurs, everybody but those of us who are carrying the bag and have a quota hanging on our heads, right? And so I thought, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm benefiting from the mentorship and the relationships that I'm building with the individuals who've been on my podcast. How can I bring that to this community and the folks who've been listening to my podcast? So we're doing an event here in Austin, May 7th and 8th, very intentionally timed. So that's the middle of a quarter, the beginning of a month. And it's also a Monday and Tuesday. So that 1, I'm taking you out of the field for a minimal amount of time. And 2, because Austin kicks ass. And it's a great excuse to come out on Friday and spend the weekend in Austin before we get started first thing Monday morning. Yeah. And I'm bringing together many of the top guests who've been on my podcast, they're doing a variety of presentations, but also very intentionally, I'm building a ton of time in the agenda just for people to network, right? Because of that NAT issue that we talked about earlier, there's never more than 90 minutes of content in a row, and then we take a 30-minute break so that you can relate and talk through and sort of deconstruct some of the conversations and the presentations that you're having with your fellow sales achievers, right? And then one of the things I'm really looking forward to is that first night. I've chosen about a dozen iconic Austin restaurants, from Tex-Mex to barbecue to steak to five-star sushi. And we're going to just break up into smaller, more intimate dinners. I'll have at least one presenter at each of those locations so that you can connect with that group of champions, right? Now I'm with 10 or 15 people, and I can have that more intimate conversation and get to know these people on a real human level, because Jim Rohn says you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I'd heard that my entire career, but I never acted on it fully enough. I did a little bit, but I think there was so much more opportunity that I missed. And so I want to try and create that opportunity for other people. And the hard part is, to your question earlier, how do I find them? And so that's what we're trying to do, is bring this together, help you find those people who are like you, who are driven, who want to be at the top, and are willing to invest their time and money to get there. And we're going to give them one hell of an experience.
Yeah, that's a great quote by Jim Rohn. I've heard that quite a bit and applied that, throughout most of my career, right? You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And also, I think whether it was Zig Ziglar or Jim Rohn, another quote I like is your net worth is based on your network, right? And so,
Amen.
What better way to expand that network with like-minded sales achievers, or sales champions, as we're calling them here, at an event like this. So what a great idea. I mean, you're going to have, top 1% sales achievers descending on Austin, which is just I agree with that. Great town, great area there. The restaurants are phenomenal. I love the idea. Come on the Friday, spend the weekend, because it's the live music capital of the U.S. It's just awesome. There's so much good stuff to do down there. Very picturesque as well. Great, beautiful hill country area. But then Monday, Tuesday, you get down to business. So that's a great event. How can our guests find out more about that? Is there a link, or is there something you could share here on the podcast where we can direct their attention to go sign up for that?
Yeah, absolutely. If they go to top1summit.com, and Sean, I've set up a referral code for your audience. So if they use the word integrity, that'll save them $150 on whatever the current registration rate is.
Oh, great. Appreciate that. So you use the word integrity. Is that upon checkout, when they're checking out for that?
Yep. It's part of the registration process.
Great. So use the word integrity, save $150. We'll put a link to this in the show notes as well, so everyone will have access to that. So let's shift gears now, Scott, and let's talk a little bit about social selling. Social selling, I'm sure you've had a lot of discussions with your guests on your show, so I'm really eager to hear from you on that. But this is a real hot topic these days, right? The use of social technologies like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth, have really taken the selling scene by storm. So given that, can you share some wisdom here from your audience, and even from yourself as a practitioner, on how do you define social selling, and how are you and your audience of top 1% sales achievers that you're interviewing, how are they leveraging social selling within the realm of achieving their sales and income goals?
Yeah, let me take a little bit different tact at this, and that is because I try and extract the secrets from the folks that are on my show. I figure it's only fair that I disclose some of my secrets on your show. Mm-hmm. I launched another podcast that I do in my day job that is owned by the company I work for, a company called Relationship One, and we focus, again, we're a professional services firm that works in and around kind of that Oracle Marketing Cloud ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So I launched a podcast called Inspired Marketing. It's very niche, right? It's only focused on that ecosystem. It has proven to be the best door opener on the planet. Because if you think about the way that opens, typically this is a very small world, and I've been playing in it for a very long time. So often I'm able to get introductions as I sort of need. But even without that, I can reach out to somebody and think about the difference of the positioning, right? The traditional positioning is, hey, Sean, I'm Scott. I do blah, 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 blah. Can I get 30 minutes of your time to vomit all over your shoes and talk to you about stuff that you could give a crud about, right?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
no. Versus I'm able to approach them and say, hey, Sean, I've got this podcast. I know that you and your team are doing some really amazing things. I would love to shine a spotlight on that and just hear some of those stories and hear what's working for you and your world. Would you be open to having a conversation with me on the podcast?
Mm-hmm.
My success rate with that is insane. We're talking 80% or better. And it then creates the opportunity for at least 3 really distinct and important touch points, right? Because first, I'm going to set up a prep call. So let's talk about this a little bit and figure out where are we going to focus and what are we going to talk about, right? Then the interview comes. And I always say, as you know, because you do this, the magic happens before and after you turn the microphone on.
Yep.
Right. But the stuff that happens before and I find after, right? After they've kind of shared this, then they get into, okay, here's the real story. Here's the part I couldn't tell you, publicly. So there's amazing stuff that comes out from that perspective. And your role is to interview. So you are in the perfect position to ask questions and shut up, as we're supposed to do as sales professionals, but we struggle with that. So it sets up just the perfect mechanism to do that. And I've interviewed, Lenovo, Optum, Medtronic, the Chicago Bears, National Instruments, Experian. This list goes on and on and on for 38 episodes. And the relationships you build from that, and then you're able to turn around and take that content because it's super relevant to the rest of my audience, because they represent my audience, right? They're the same persona. They're the same person. I can then turn around and say, hey, Sean, I just recorded this episode with Nick at DXC, and he's got this great story about what they're doing there around pursuit marketing. You guys got to listen to this. I think it might be relevant to what you're doing. So it also enables me to stay in touch in a really meaningful way. And again, I've recorded, in those cases, those are shorter episodes. Those are much more digestible. Those are probably 20, 25 minutes. Again, I record one conversation. I have a post-production company that does all the work after that. And then I'm literally in somebody's ear for that amount of time. And they're hearing from, and a lot of these are our existing clients. So they're bragging on me and they're bragging on my company and my consultants. It's an amazing, amazing tool. And I think that we have to continue to think about social more broadly. And I think social in general tends to be a little too passive. Like, oh, well, if I tweet things every now and then, or I click like on people's stuff, like that will lead to opportunities. Maybe, but what can you do to take more control and really drive to a meaningful relationship and a meaningful conversation that actually leads somewhere and isn't, I retweeted you, so now I'm your best friend.
Exactly. Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, as you know, I'm a huge believer in the power of the podcast and having a platform to really interview people, and then you could put your point of view around that and share that out with your audience. Could be a ton of value. That could be another whole episode on, the podcast and creating content and all that stuff. Our audience is very familiar with my concept of prospecting on purpose, and part of the social selling element of that is I did one episode called Ascending Up the Credibility Ladder. Right. And you're really describing that you're going to have more credibility in the eyes of the person you interviewed, that executive, as well as others that you're going to turn around and share that content with other executives. They're going to see that as valuable. It's the difference of the bottom rung of that ladder is really being a subject matter expert. And that comes through research. You just got to know your game. That's the price of entry into selling in today's world, right? If you're not a subject matter expert, you don't know your niche of the world, then you're not going to compete. But that's not a differentiator. You send up the credibility ladder one level to thought leader. That's kind of what you described of, hey, I'm going to tweet or share things out and put my point of view. I didn't author the content, but I'm going to share it and say, here's my point of view. There's a great article, a great podcast on this. But really getting up to the next level is go-to specialist. And that's really what you are in the eyes of your prospects, Scott, that they're going to look at you as a go-to specialist in the niche that you're in, because you're authoring the content, you're creating it, and then sharing it. So there's a huge difference between being an author of the content, right, and creating content versus curating content. There's just two different aspects of that. So it's great that you brought that up and kind of shared that. It's Inspired Marketing. Is that right? The name of that podcast that your other podcast is called Inspired Marketing. Is that correct?
It is. That's correct. And if you think about it, I'm really not authoring anything. It's sort of an extreme form of curation. And I've done this twice, right? So the podcast is one example, but with the previous firm I was with, I wrote a book. I wrote a book called Making Rain with Events because I was in the event marketing technology space. Mm-hmm. But if you look at what that book is, I had 12 co-authors. Each one of them wrote a chapter. So I wrote 2.5 chapters and coordinated a project because I had good resources. So I think, again, you can get creative. You can get out of the box. I didn't write an 80,000 word book. That's insane. But what I did is I found the other real experts. And again, it's that guilt by association, right? Yeah. Well, geez, if this guy's hanging out with all of these folks, and now it's gotten to a point with the Inspired Marketing podcast, we're jumping through some final hoops, but with any luck here in the next month or two, I will have a sit-down interview conversation with a Fortune 100 CMO.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, so it's just a unique entry point, a unique connection point, with your target audience. Hey, I would like to interview you on a podcast. That's much different than showing up and throwing up all over their shoes, as you put it earlier, right?
Exactly. Nobody wants that.
I've heard of the show up and throw up, but you really went the next level all over the shoes, and it gave the audience something really to picture, right? That's awesome.
It's like a Mardi Gras visualization, right? And if you've been there, you can even get the smell of that. And it's not what anybody wants.
That's right. Well, if social selling is all the rage these days, Scott, then its chief rival that's equally as polarizing is the topic of cold calling, right? So a lot of people out there, a lot of prognosticators, especially social selling only folks, say cold calling is dead, right? Don't pick up the phone, or all you need to do is use social. And I think there's some danger, to going to extremes on either side of that argument there, if you will. So I'd like to ask you, is cold calling dead? And if not, where does it fit in today's modern sales world, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's definitely not dead. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to sort of everything in moderation. And again, given the amount of work I do in the marketing space, a marketer would never go to market using one channel. Right? You use an omni-channel approach. You use many channels to kind of find where people are and what resonates for them. And I think the proof that cold calling is absolutely not dead is I think I've interviewed 4 SDRs at this point. And again, number one SDRs, they're the ones setting the most meetings, creating the largest number of opportunities. Lots we can learn from them. One of my favorites of those interviews was with Florin Tatulia. And Florin, just a very analytical guy, and was measuring the crud out of everything. And he could tell you the best tool I have in my arsenal is the phone. But you can't leave it at just that. And he had so many great tips. So one that I loved is, he said, think about what is the response? What do you want somebody to do for voicemail? The reality is nobody is going to call you back ever. So what can you ask them to do that will matter? So what he does is he pairs an email with a voicemail, and he references the email in the voicemail. So he doesn't even leave his number. It's like, you're not going to call me. Why would I leave my number? That's silly. Go look at the email I sent you and hit reply to that. It's a much more natural sort of approach. So again, you've got to use the phone. You've got to use email. You've got to use social channels. You've got to use carrier pigeons. I don't care what the heck it is. You just have to find kind of where people are. Honestly, I think we're getting to a point with some of these like mass automation tools. I just don't pick up my phone from a number that's not already in my contacts anymore. It's just not happening, right? And I think more and more of the world is getting there, but email can be just bad. I ask this question of the executives I work with because I think probably marketing executives and technology executives must be the most pounded on people on the planet. And I ask them, I'm like, how do you deal with this? Like, you get this onslaught. And one of those individuals in particular, he said, the first thing I do as soon as I get a generic email message, I just create a filter for it, and I never see anything from that company ever again. I don't have to worry about it. So you have to be so careful, and you have to be just personalized and relevant, and take that extra step and use a variety of channels and be omni-channel in your approach. That's the way that you open the doors and have success.
Yeah, great lessons in what you just walked through there. So omni-channel versus being single-threaded. The phone is another outreach communication mechanism or tool that you can use. Phone, email, social, right? Events, podcasts, on down the line. So the more channels that you're leveraging, you're going to increase the odds that you're going to connect with them. You're creating awareness and then getting attention eventually through one of those channels. And then, again, we can go on a whole episode on just techniques of using the phone, warming up the cold call, really working on your messaging so it resonates and makes sense. Do you leave a voicemail? Don't you leave a voicemail? Do you leave your number? Don't you leave your number? Right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that. And I'll go all the way back to what you said with the top 3 kind of common themes that you gleaned from all your interviews with the 30 plus interviews with with the top sales achievers. The second one, there's no one recipe. Right. So it's the old, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. The Henry Ford quote, right? So you got to have a system. It's got to be well thought out and prepared. You got to believe in it and then execute it, but then do your research to understand what is effective, what's not. So you're not banging your head against the wall. Right. If you could believe in something, if it doesn't work, then at some point you got to pivot instead of persevere. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you've actually highlighted this on your show. I just hosted a webinar for Vidyard, and they've got that Go Video product that is amazing. And again, I was interviewing folks that are using it really effectively. And like anything else, it's the ones who are the most personalized and the most of them in that approach. One of the guys, he was writing songs for his prospects. Mm-hmm. Wow. he would literally, he had sort of this chord progression thing going on, and he would just draft out a couple of notes. There's some YouTube videos on it.
That's awesome.
It's awesome, right? But again, not everybody is a singer. Not everybody can write music. But maybe you're funny. Maybe you're, like me, you're funny looking. Whatever it is, like play up that thing. Make fun of yourself. Like be creative. Be human. I think that's what connects with and resonates with buyers anymore. Like people do business with people. Mm-hmm. It's not about the best automation or the best scale. It's what do you do for them, and how do you, again, just make real human connection.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways you can do that, but you got to do the research and all the other stuff. Like you said, there's like 8 podcasts here that we can deep dive in, but you've done a fair amount of it. So, go back and listen to some of Sean's previous episodes. He's got good stuff in there.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. The creativity, being unique, right. Being different. If someone called and left a voicemail or they sent a video, even better, and they got a guitar and they got a 6-stringer, they're strumming along and singing a song to you instead. I mean, that's going to stand out in a sea of competition as unique and different than everybody else. You're going to get their attention that way, provided you have something good to say. It's not nonsense. It's a good song. You don't sound terrible. Then I think you'll be good. But yeah, the effort, it's one thing to say for the effort, but if it's creative and unique and different, that's going to set you apart quite a bit. So think about how you could do that. You talk about, I think you said, do you the best way that you know how. Be unique, be creative, be different, but be true to yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, Scott. Well, it's amazing. This time has flown by, but we're nearing the end of our time together here today. So that means one thing on the Sales Integrity Podcast is you're well aware it's time for the sales cycle. Now,
I'm ready to do this.
You ready? So the sales cycle is not only a process that we all follow as sales professionals, or that we should, right? We should have a process in place there. But it's really the name of our lightning round here on the Sales Integrity Podcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you 7 questions in rapid fire format. And I'm going to time you to make it fun because we're all competitive in the sales world, right? And I'll see if you could beat the best time. And that still remains Stu Schlackman, one of our previous guests, author of a book called 4 People You Should Know. And he completed the sales cycle in 1 minute and 55 seconds. Think you could beat that?
Well, Stu had a good run. But, my goal here is quick quality, and hopefully my preparation pays off and puts me in the number 1 spot, Sean. I think it's going to happen.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think quick quality is a great way to say that. So as you know, I'm kind of the guard dog or the police watchman here on this. So you got to balance speed with value. You can't just give one word answers. If our audience can't glean value out of it, I'm going to ask you to expand, so that'll take even longer. So make sure you have, good, succinct answers, but they're valuable. And it sounds like you prepared for this, which everybody knows on this podcast audience. I believe in make your sales pop, preparation, organization, productivity. So we'll see if we can get through this in an organized manner, make it productive because of Scott's preparation. So you ready for the sales cycle?
I'm ready. Are you ready to ask those questions real quick?
I am. I start the clock and then I ask them as fast as I can do it. I do it for everyone. So I'll keep it fair for you. It's good. I love Stu. He did a great job, but it's been a long time. I mean, he's really been holding, he's like unfortunately, like the Patriots or the dominant team that everybody wants to knock off, but he's staying up there. So I know he does listen to the podcast. He'll get a chuckle out of this. And he's had many competitors and challengers come along and say they're going to knock him off, and nobody's done it yet. So we'll see. We'll see if you can do it. I'm pulling for you. Okay. All right, here we go. So I'm going to start the timer in 3, 2, 1. First question, name a specific technology or tool you use for identifying and researching target market prospects.
I start with LinkedIn and I go from there.
Great. Question 2, what is the best method to initially get the attention of and connect with your target market prospects?
Get an introduction from somebody they know and trust.
Great. Question number 3. What method do you use to consistently stay top of mind if your prospects aren't ready to buy just yet?
I leverage my niche podcast called Inspired Marketing.
Awesome. Question number 4. What sales process methodology do you use to manage opportunities through the sales cycle?
So that's an area that I'm working to improve based on my conversation with David Weiss about his MedPick process, which you can learn about at top1.fm/24, episode 24.
Great. Question number 5. How do you define the concept of closing a sale?
I see the traditional close of the sale as just the beginning. As much as possible, I try and take ownership of the results that were committed in the sales process. And instead of closing a transaction, I'm trying to open up future opportunities for more business, references, and referrals.
Great. Question 6. How do you know when it's time to close a sale for a given opportunity?
So the close is just a natural next step in the process. If you set everything up properly from the beginning and communicate that to the buyer.
Last question. What is your best advice for sales achievers to improve their closing ratio?
Qualify better at the beginning and only focus on real opportunities. So Yella Dendunen talks about that in episode 30 on the Sales Success Stories podcast and is currently closing 64% of his opportunities.
Wow. All right. I said, wow. What do you think that means?
I think I won.
Good. You think you won? All right. You did win. 1 minute and 39 seconds. We have a new champion.
Yeah, but
congrats, Scott. That's awesome. See, folks, this is what preparation does. I prepare all my guests. I let them know. We kind of like Scott outlined for his podcast. I give them an outline, and then I go down rabbit holes based on the unique perspective of the audience members. But the same thing every time. If you listen to the podcast, I always go through the sales cycle so people can prepare and understand the questions I'm going to ask. And this is a great example of what preparation can do for you. So awesome. 1 minute, 39 seconds. You will be the name I read off moving forward. I will send Stu a note to let him know that he's been dethroned and see what he says about it. He was getting a chuckle that he was still the champion after all this time. I think it was from earlier in the year. So nicely done. Before even the end of the year, you closed the deal and you got the top spot. Congrats, Scott.
That's how you do it. Yep, proof that your method works.
Awesome. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to end the episode now. And what I like to do first is have you provide, Scott, not all your audience members that you've had, which are great advice, but this is coming from Scott Ingram. What is your number one piece of advice for our audience? Keep in mind, they're just like you, B2B, tech sales, longer sales cycle, team pursuit sales cycle, senior executive. So knowing all of that, what is your number one piece of advice for our audience?
Surround yourself and learn from the best. Simple as that.
Awesome. And then let's also have you share with how people can get a hold of you. There's a lot of different ways, the podcast and website, but feel free now to share, how can people connect with Scott Ingram?
Yeah, if you want to check out what I'm doing, best place to go is top1.fm. But if you want to communicate with me, just send me an email. Send that to scott@top1.fm. The way I use LinkedIn, I'm really, really picky. So you're welcome to follow me there. But because I'm using it for those introductions, I often don't connect with people that I don't have some type of a relationship with. But that can always start via email, and then we can kind of take it from there.
Man, there's a whole nother podcast on the etiquette of LinkedIn, quantity versus quality, and what's your methodology for that, and that's awesome. So it's good to hear. So email address that Scott provided. The other thing is I'll just reaffirm he has 2 really good podcasts, Sales Success Stories, and where he's interviewing the top 1% sales achievers out there. in this B2B complex technical world, it tends to be. It's not 100% probably, but for the most part, it sounds like it is. So this is very relevant for our audience. And then also the Inspired Marketing podcast. So I'll take a listen to that too. I haven't done that yet. So good to know about that, and I'll go listen to that. But for our audience, why would you want to listen to that? You're in sales. Why do you want to listen to Inspired Marketing? For the model to emulate, Scott. If you're seriously considering, how to be unique and creative and set yourself apart and stand out in a sea of competition, maybe creating your own podcast, reaching out to executives and asking them to be interviewed on it could be a good way to do that. So just go ahead and listen to Inspired Marketing Podcast, see how Scott's doing it, and that'll give you an idea that you can potentially emulate. So Scott, thank you so much for coming on today. Really enjoyed it. One final reaffirmation of that top one. Is it Top One Summit? What is it for the event in Austin? Where can they go for that again?
Yep, top1summit.com. It's the number one, but if you spell it out, that'll get you there too.
Okay, so top1summit.com. Use the word integrity at checkout, and you save $150 on the ticket, and go surround yourself with like-minded top sales achievers, top sales champions. Enjoy Austin and network with those folks down there. So that'll do it for today's show. I appreciate everyone listening. We're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode as we always do with a few quick reminders. Real quick, before we end today's episode, I wanted to just share a few quick reminders with you. No matter where you listen to the Sales Integrity Podcast, please subscribe to it. Just subscribe to the show so you get them automatically on a weekly basis. The more subscribers we have, the more we're found out there by other potential subscribers, so that greatly helps the show. We are now on Stitcher Radio, so in addition to Stitcher, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And no matter where you subscribe or listen to us, please provide a 5-star rating and a quick 1 to 2 sentence review. That also helps others find the podcast. So help us grow the show. That would be great. And also, we still have our free 7-day video email course out there. You can go to mastercomplexselling.com to subscribe to that. So again, mastercomplexselling.com. It's a free 7-day video email course titled 7 Steps to Master the Game of Complex Technical Selling. So that'll do it for today. Go out there in the sales world today. Help your customers buy what they want, what they need, and what benefits them. And most importantly, go out there and make it a great day.